All right. Good evening, gamers, and welcome to episode 19 of Games with Dave. Tonight, I am joined by none other than the man from Planet X himself, Levi Combs from Planet X Games. Levi is currently running the fully funded Kickstarter Dungeon Malarky, a strange OSR zine full of monsters, spell components, plants, hazards, and more that you can plug directly into your game. Thank you so much for joining me tonight, Levi. I'm so excited to have you on.
No, man. Thank you for having me on. I'm the pleasure to be here.
Oh, dude, I told you when we were talking, I've got to try so hard to not like fanboy out tonight. I love your work.
Get out of here.
Um, so to get things started, I always do like a couple little icebreakers. And Neon Lords RPG says they're watching from Joey Royale's pizza party in the chat. So,
Heyo, the best.
um, what are your big plans for TotalCon? I know you're going, and I'm super bummed that I can't make it. Initially, I did have it planned to go, and we had talked about talked about having a beer or five
Yeah,
when
oh
we
yeah.
were
Let's
down
do it.
there, and now the beer or five is probably gonna have to wait till next year's TotalCon. But what are your plans?
No, man. So I love that con. Total Con is run by some really great people. It's one of the better cons in my opinion. So there's like different, levels of cons, but as far as like the kind of like mid-range like cons where you can sit down and actually enjoy a game and you can talk to your friends and peers and you can have a beer at night and you don't really have to worry about running a booth at a trade show. It's not like, you're not overwhelmed. It's like the perfect size con. It's like North Texas RPG Con. It's like the perfect size, and they keep it the perfect size. And again, run by impeccable people, and that whole like Northeast crew of wild dudes are trying to go to that con, and man, they're just awesome to be around, and they're to the last man. They're all just like great players. So the games are good. You can get into good games, and then after everything wraps up and you're done playing, you can go to the bar and have a really good time. So really, it's just the camaraderie and the hang is what I'm mostly looking forward to. Looking forward to seeing my friends from the IPU, Jeff Kalanian and E. McGarty, Jason Gardner, and then just running in the guys that I see at cons over and over again. It's going to be a fun time and it's a good con. So if you are anywhere in the Northeast area and you can make that con, like if you're listening, it's a good one to go to. It's a lot of fun.
It sounds it. Um, for folks that may not know, can you explain what the IPU is?
Okay, the IPU is if you want to break it down to what it basically, it's the Independent Publishers Union, but we named it that without really kind of thinking about like what people would think that it was an actual union, which it's not. It's just it's just a bunch of buddies who got together who all make independent third party publishing material, just a bunch of indie publishers that got together, and we share booth costs, and we help vend the booths together. We sell each other's products, and just it's just a merry. It's like the Legion of Doom. It's like these, just a great group of dudes who got together, and we help each other out. There's no locked doors. There's no barred gates. There's nobody. There's no secrets being withheld from each other. Like if somebody has a publishing problem or a question, we can go to one of the other guys with maybe with a little bit more experience, who will kind of either tell us what they would do in that position or kind of hold our hand through it. We share connections, and we just help each other out, which is what independent publishing should be about anyways. So just a bunch of publishers that got together, and we help each other out, and we keep it real.
Nice. That's awesome that you guys do that. So, what is it that inspires you to keep creating such an abundance of awesome material? I mean, you've got phylactery, your articles in Scientific Barbarian, then modules like Jungle Tomb of the Mummy Bride. Yeah. Whoop, whoop. I don't have my omnibus, but I've got this sitting here.
Fantastic. Wait till you get your hands on it. It's amazing.
I can't wait. But what is it that inspires you to just pump out the volume of work that you do?
I mean, I've been in the hobby for a long time. Since I was, just a young kid. and I had kind of a backwards way of getting into the hobby. Like my experience was not really traditional. I grew up in the South, in a very small town. There was no Dungeons and Dragons or role playing games really to be had. There weren't any stores that were selling it. I kind of stumbled across my entry into it in kind of a backwards way through like getting stuff at a yard sale and then sending off for some stuff once I kind of figured out how cool it was. And then I remember when my red box came, it didn't even have any dice.
Oh no.
It had so like I'm looking at the rules, wondering what all these D20s and D8s. So man, I had no idea. I didn't know that D stood for dice. So my first couple of years of playing were really just we were making stuff up as we went and telling stories and flipping dice, or sorry, flipping coins, and just kind of fudging the material, just so we would have just some. My friends and I would just have something to play, So from that is born just like and all my influences like comic books and the science fiction book club and reading fantasy and all the movies that I love. Out of all of that is born like this urge to create. And just the stuff I just create the stuff that I like and that I would want to play when it comes down to it. So that's how you get such it's a strange project sometimes. Some of the zines that come out have some kind of funky names, and they're kind of all over the place. Like I'll do a sci-fi one or maybe like a Weird West one, and then I'll go back to doing some kind of like crazy weird fantasy. But when it comes down to it, I just like doing like making the things that I would want to play.
Nice. Can't blame you there. I'm going to be doing the same one of these days. I told you one of my ideas before we got on air that
Heck yeah, dude.
I've got to chase down and get it out of my head. So there's so many
That's really the
things.
thing, though, is like getting it out of your head. Like,
Yeah.
it will haunt me if I have an idea for something that I think is really cool, even if nobody else thinks it's cool. If I think it's like really, really neat and cool, and I keep thinking of things that I could do with it, or like little, avenues that I could explore, like it will bother me until I until I get it out on paper, or I type it up on the screen, or I tell somebody. Some of my closest friends, like I will just tear their ear off because I just won't stop talking about, hey, I've got this idea for a Weird West thing, and there's a whole like scenario where there's a giant Twinkie that is alive, but he's evil, and it's like a whole dream state, and like there's these fruit pie town members, and there's yada yada yada, all this bizarre, and they're like, what are you even talking about? Like, fruit pie people, what is an evil Twinkie? What are you talking about? And then it just kind of goes from there. And I've got some really good collaborators over the just over the years. A lot of the guys that I started with were still together, still collaborating and putting stuff out. Adrian Landeros, Lawrence Hernandez, Ed Bickford, Casey Christopherson. All these guys I've been creating with since the very, very beginning of my getting my foot in the door of the hobby, at least the pro side of the hobby. So, it's kind of a joy to work with those guys because they're also talented. So I get to work with those guys, and it's very cool.
It sounds cool. Now, if I remember, I read somewhere that Casey Christopherson was one of the guys that got you into actually publishing, correct?
Casey he's my mentor. If I'm just being straightforward, when I couldn't get anybody else to listen to me, like just to take notice of this guy over here waving and saying, "Hey, I've got stuff that I think is cool." When I couldn't get anybody to publish me, when I was just wondering what to do, he was like Mr. Tough Love and came along and said, "Hey, instead of waiting on somebody else to publish your stuff, you should do your own Kickstarter. I'll help you, show you how this is done, have this part's done, and how this part's done. I'll hook you up with people who can help you with other things." And my first question was, "What's a Kickstarter?" So I had no idea. And so he showed me that, and I was like, I really could do this on myself. All I need really is to just do it. That was the important part, was pull the trigger and do it. So so I did. I put a lot of work into it. I wanted to make sure that I got it right, and I didn't disappoint him. And he helped me along every step of the way. He was the guy who answered those phone calls in the middle of the night. He was the guy who answered my weird text full of dumb questions that I could have just gone on and Googled, but he was that guy. He's a teacher in his normal day job, but he was my teacher. Like he showed me how to structure an adventure, how to, how to take the ideas in my head and put them in a structure. He introduced me to people that I still collaborate and work with today. Like the very first artists who work on all my projects were guys that Casey introduced me to and vouched for me and said, "Hey, this is a good dude. He pays on time, and he writes interesting things that will do your illustrations justice." So I got really lucky in that I had this great mentor who was very giving and didn't ask for anything in return. It wasn't like he was saying, "Hey, you need to give me 10%." That wasn't his thing at all. Like he just wanted to see, me succeed, and he thought that I had cool ideas, and he wanted to see those out in the world. So I owe him a tremendous debt of gratitude, not only for what he did for me, but for all the people that he introduced me to that opened me up to other things. And yeah, Casey that's why in any Planet X product, if you open up to the credits, you'll always see his name. Didn't matter if he didn't even know that I wrote it, his name will always be in there, because that's a debt of gratitude that I owe that guy, really, for as long as I publish books.
Oh, that's awesome that you had someone like that and that you go out of your way to pay tribute to him, I guess would be the say it, with putting
No,
him
he's
in
like the Don. He's like, again, he's like, like, yeah, he's the guy. Like he's for me, he's my mentor, and he's mentored dozens, if not hundreds, of other people, mostly artists, to be honest with you, because a lot of the artists that he taught in school have gone on to have careers in in RPGs. Adrian Landeros and Quentin Soulabard and Thwampam. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing his name. Santa Norva said all these artists, these great artists, very, very skilled, were either students of his or that he is interconnected with, and those are just a few. Like they're actually quite a few. He's mentored a lot of people, and again, I was just very, very lucky to hook up with somebody who just wanted to see me do well. So concentrated on that than other things, because it could have gone awry with somebody else. But with him, he was very focused. He's got his own work, that he let me, like he let me write a little bit on City of Brass, which is like his masterwork. It's this fantastic adventure that's it's high level adventure. It's like a 500-page book, and he let me kind of wet my beak a little bit and put a little bit of stuff in there, which was extremely generous of him. And that helped get my confidence up, or at least keep it up through my first couple projects. So again, I owe Casey an enormous amount of debt.
Nice. So there are so many things I want to ask you about this zine.
Sure, man. Shoot.
I guess I'll start by asking how long you've been toiling away at this rather anarchic looking tome.
Are you talking about Dungeon Malarky?
Yes. Actually, yeah, I should have specified that when I said the zine I wanted to ask you about, Dungeon Malarky. That cover is very anarchic looking, I guess would be the way to say it.
No, for sure. So Dungeon Malarky is a zine that just for everybody who's tuning in, it's a zine that I have up on Kickstarter for ZineQuest. And he's right when he says it's anarchist looking, very much so, because it's kind of like an ode to the counterculture classic anarchist cookbook. Down from the font, the way the cover looks, the whole deal. It's very much an homage. It's an ode. And I don't know how many people are familiar with that book, but it was kind of like there at the end of the 60s on into the 70s. That was kind of like the banned book that was taking out it was the one that you would go to a head shop, and you would see it behind the counter next to like the ninja stars. It was like you would open it up and it'd be like, here's how to build a bomb, or how to make LSD, or here's how to take like peanut shells and turn them into a hallucinogen.
Yeah.
Here's how to make dynamite and plastique, and how to make traps and maybe some judo moves, and then just all Molotov cocktails, all this like crazy, weird, dangerous stuff. put into this book, but you would only find them at like head shops or like behind the counter at some kind of like halfway sketchy place. So, I had a copy when I was a kid. I don't know what happened to it. But then about 5-6 years ago, I was in Alaska and went down to my local bookshop, and there it was, just in a stack of other books. Like, you've got like, like The Hound of the Baskervilles, and then like Game of Thrones, and then like the Anarchist Cookbook. I was like, what the hell? So it was pretty cheap, so I bought it, and it was just kind of like a little novelty. And then my friend Tony Avina, he's a colorist for professional colorist for comics. Has worked on Batman and Green Lantern, and worked for DC Wildstorm. If you ever read an issue of The Boys,
Yep.
that's his. Yeah, that's he's the colorist on that.
Oh, nice.
But he was like, "Hey, listen, all this cool stuff, weird stuff you're doing, you should do something called the Alchemist Cookbook." And I was like, "That's genius!" And we could make it look like this. And he was like, "Yeah, and you could use the font and lay it out and all the illustrations." So we just kind of came up with this idea together. And so I started looking into it. I was like, well, Alchemist Cookbook's pretty close to the Anarchist Cookbook. I better kind of go do my due diligence and see who owns the rights and patents and yada, yada, yada. And I found out actually through a friend, Zach Goins. He was like, hey, did you know that there's actually a movie called The Alchemist Cookbook? And then I did some further research into that, and I realized, like, oh, the people who own the Anarchist Cookbook, who own the rights to it now, they're not counterculture people at all. They're like an independent publishing group from Arkansas, I think Ozark Press or something like that. And they put out a lot of like fringe books, like stuff that I necessarily would never want to be tangled up with. I mean, more power to them, freedom of expression, freedom of speech, but not my jam. And I didn't want to get into a thing where it might be litigious or yada, 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 yada. So I just completely changed the name. And when I was trying to think of the name, like, what will I call this? I thought about this conversation I had online a couple of years ago during a podcast with Tony Vicinda of Plus One. He does a podcast and a stream. Does a bunch of stuff, actually. And then there was a guy named Alex Murray. He was one of the guys playing in the game. And I was describing the dungeon that we were in. He says, "Oh yeah, it's like just full of dungeon malarkey." And I was like, "Oh my god, stop the presses! Like, that is genius. That's a genius name. Let me just mark this down now. Would you mind if some point in the future I just use that as a title for something?" He's like, "Absolutely, go for it. I have no ties to it. It's all yours." So, cut forward to 2-3 years later, I'm thinking, what can I call this? We don't have the Alchemist Cookbook. I don't want to do the Arcanist Cookbook because it's not quite what it. It's a great name, but it's not quite what it is. And then I was like, oh yeah, Dungeon Malarkey. So I just checked in with Alex again, and he was, oh yeah, go for it. So that's how that came about. We got a weird little project called Dungeon Malarkey with a kind of a storied back history.
Nice. So what has been your favorite thing to design in Dungeon Malarkey?
Oh gosh,
you
man.
You had to pick one, or can't you pick one?
I don't know. So the idea behind the zine is, man, it's a lot. There's weird hazards, there's unusual monsters, there's curious magical items, there's magical plants, there's these kind of bizarre spell components, and it's all about what you can do with those. All these things, all these elements combined, what you can do with those to either craft your own magic items or boost spells, or how they can come in useful either to you as a player or judge, sorry, as a DM or judge, or as a player. So both a judge and a player could use this, could use elements from this. And it's really, really great for populating dungeons and kind of like desolate, forlorn places with weird stuff that your players just honestly aren't going to expect. Like, there's some really bizarre things in there. There's I'll run through a couple of them. Again, I don't want to give away too much or bury the lead, but a few of them are pretty interesting. There's an eldritch tapeworm, which is kind of like kind of harkens back to things like ear seekers and rot grubs and all these kind of like parasitic creatures that you would find back in the old days of D&D, like in the BX and AD&D first edition days of D&D,
Yep.
there would be these things on, in on the bodies when they would get searched, or in treasure piles, or like if the thief put his ear up to a door to listen, the ear seekers might come through. So I was always kind of fascinated with like that parasitic sort of aspect to these otherwise innocuous creatures. So I did the Eldritch Tapeworm, which is essentially like this kind of like cosmic parasite that attaches itself to wizards or users of arcane magic, and it gives them some benefits, especially at first. And they might not even know it's there, but slowly but surely it drains a little bit, and then it is like once it burns through a wizard, it's actually like the nascent form of a much more recognizable creature in D&D lore, which I will not give away here. But it was just a cool little thing. And then you could take, like, if you're a wizard and you have some of these, you've managed to corral some of these Eldritch Tapeworms, you can use them as a spell component to amplify certain spells that are listed in the text. And then these creatures might also be used when fashioning a magic item of sorts. You might have to have them in order to complete the ritual in creating your magic item. So again, useful to players, useful to judges. And then there's always a hook at the bottom of everything. There's always like a place that there's a little bit of lore that tells a little bit about the creatures, or about the place, or the hazard, or the spell component, whatever. And then there's a hook, like a story hook, so that the DM or the judge isn't just like kind of left hanging out in the wind by himself. He has a hook that he can get this into the game with. So yeah, that's just one. There's creatures called smite mites, which are basically these half invisible little bugs that will infest a mummy, and the mummy, you're fighting a mummy, you think, oh, this thing's going to be a pushover or whatever, and all of a sudden it hits you for like 47 points of damage. And you're like, oh my god, what happened? Well, that's because it's infested with smite mites. It makes it a little bit more powerful, but while also kind of there's also a downfall of that as well. And those can not only infect monsters, they can infect players. So there's all kinds of ways and uses that you can get this kind of stuff into your game. There's like 50 plus things in this packed in the zine. So there's a lot of material in there for players and DMs to kind of draw from.
Nice. Sounds so cool.
That was a very long-winded way of saying, like, it's cool. There's a bunch of stuff in it. Go check it out.
No, the smite might sound really cool, and I'm going to have to throw them at some players here in the near future.
I mean, and listen, there's all kinds of bizarre. That's only one. Those are only two, like, small things in a much larger book full of utter weirdness. So
I think I read it's 60 pages.
I mean, at the time of when I put it up, it was at 48. But 48. The more, like, the more money that people are putting into it, the bigger that it gets. I just keep writing material, because I want to make sure that the money to fund this thing goes back into the book. So, I bought more art for it than it originally had. I've written more material. So I'm thinking it's going to be upwards of 60, 64, 68 pages, something like that.
That's a big zine.
I hope so, man, because it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of cool stuff in there.
There is. I had some questions about some other creatures and stuff in there, but I don't want to make you give too much away.
No, it's okay, man. Ask whatever you want to ask.
Okay. Well, one of the things that really made my eyes light up when I read it in the Kickstarter description was the Myconid Corpse Garden. What can you tell me about that?
So I've actually done that a couple different times. Not so much Myconid Corpse Garden, but I've used like a mushroom corpse garden a couple times. Like in my very first adventure, Jungle Tomb of the Mummy Bride, there's kind of like a side quest to this place where you can go and get these information from these myconids, and they live in this giant subterranean corpse garden where they are literally just farming corpses, and that makes a very fertile ground for all their mushrooms that do all their cool effects and neat things. But they can, you basically go down there to trip, and then you get, then you might find the answers to your questions that way, But I've used it there. I've used a version of that in the lost level of Jungle Tomb and the Mummy Bride for the DCC version. And I've kind of revisited mentions of it over the years, but it's just a kind of a cool visual. I think a lot of what D&D and a lot of what fantasy role playing or just role playing in general is one of the things that players remember, these really fantastic locations. That's for, like, you want to have memorable places. Like, everybody's been to a castle or an inn or a evil forest or whatever. But like, when you go to like a subterranean corpse garden inhabited by these sentient mushrooms or puffing these psychedelic clouds of spores in your face so they can communicate with you, that's memorable. That's something you go like, oh man, years later when you're talking to your friends, like, remember that time, like, our characters, so and so, and we tripped and we had this vision, and this is kind of the kind of stuff that I want to write. So I think that location based component to adventuring is very important.
I agree. I want to touch back on something you said. You brought up the title, and from what I have seen, it seems that I've read that you're a title first guy,
I am. You've done
which
your homework.
which is very different. Like, I'm an idea guy, then come up with the title, and I've seen that you're a title first guy. How does that work? Like, I can't picture having just like a title in my head and then coming downward on the pyramid that way of building
Right.
something.
I understand that it is a very unusual way to do it. Like, I totally and completely embrace that. And I haven't met anybody else yet. I'm sure they're out there, but I haven't met them yet. That kind of works that way. Most people are idea people. Matt Finch one time told me that he is a map first guy, which I was like, oh really? Like, that's kind of cool. Like, he creates a map first and then an idea around the map, which I thought was very interesting and novel and very cool. But for me, it's the name first. Like, I want a name that as soon as I hear it, I'm like, ooh, all right, that generates ideas for me. So like, take like my third module was called Escape from Skullcano Island. I got that title in my head, and at first it was like assault on Skullcano Island. I was like, no. Like, let's change that around. I started thinking about like grindhouse movie tropes and like B movie titles. I was like, no, Escape from Skullcano Island. That's way better. And then everything grew from that title. Was at first it was a volcano that was carved out like a skull. But then I was like, no, that's, people do that all the time. Then it became like a volcano that had like a giant kaiju skull basically spiked on top of it by some titanic force. Then I was like, oh, cool, there's kaiju on the island. Well, then here's that. And then why are the kaiju on the island? Well, okay, well, then here's that. And that's how you get this apocalyptic death cult involved. And there's dinosaurs and cargo cults and all kinds of like sunken temples and kind of a lost world sort of feeling. And then you have like all these like weird little like divergent cults that are worshiping the kaiju. And I was like, this just kept growing and growing and filling up pages. And I was like, I actually have something here. I can actually, do this. And that's how that book came about, just from that title, and that's really how they all come out. A lot of times I have a document on my phone that's like, I don't know, like 200 titles long of just the oddest, weirdest stuff. Some of it will never see the light of day because it's not an avenue worth exploring, but a lot of it will. And some of it won't even become adventures. Some of them will become zines. Some of them will become like a pamphlet module. Some of them might become work for somebody else. Some of them might generate an idea that I end up using later on for something completely different. I mean, there's a title in there called Bong Wizards and Burger Clowns. I just think it sounds cool. I don't know if it will ever see the light of day, but that might be like a cool like pamphlet module to make. I don't know about like, I don't know, assaulting a haunted McDonald's or something. I don't know. Who knows? There's no telling. But the title just gives me agency to kind of like riff and create and like spawn these ideas that kind of fall in place behind the title. So that's how I work. Again, not really the way that a lot of other people do, but I think it's cool.
I do too. I just don't think I could do it, but I'm going to give it a try and see if it finally digs ideas out of my head that are buried in there.
Hey, there's a book called The Tome of Adventure Design by Matt Finch.
I've got that.
And he has a whole section in there where you can generate titles for adventures. it's really useful. Like it's really, really good. Like I highly recommend. That's one of like the pillars of like modern game design books that I like anyways, is that particular book. Um, the other one being um gosh, it's Goodman Games. It's called How to Write Adventure Modules That Don't Suck.
Yes. Yep.
And it's got like 30 articles in it from a who's who murderers row of cool writers and creators in the hobby. You know, everybody from Joseph Goodman all the way down to, you know, all the way through all his writers, you know, through guys like Casey. Casey wrote a chapter of that. And then you've got just a ton of people from the hobby. So those two books are really good for people who want to start writing adventures. You know, read the advice in those books and heed it, because there's especially the chapter by Joe is really, really good.
All right. Another thing that I saw back from an old, not an older episode, but I think it was episode 77 or 78 of RPG Ramblings.
Mm.
I thought I was the only person that did this. You were talking about how you'll put a song on loop and just
Yes,
listen to it till it becomes like your mantra
it
of,
does.
and
Yeah.
I thought I was the only person that did that because I'll find like a song from a soundtrack that'll just kind of get me going. And then I just
Yep.
push the button, the repeat button a couple times till it's showing that one.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden I'm sitting there just click clacking away on the keyboard. And I'm like,
Yeah,
whoa,
man.
what happened?
I like to do it at like a kind of a low volume where it's just kind of like ambient noise. But like and you know, Jeff, the host of RPG Rambley, he kind of laughed at me, kind of laughed it off, like when I told him that. I was like, no, really, like I'll put it on almost like it's brown noise in the background, just enough to zone out anything else that's happening in my house or wherever I'm at. And I think the thing I used, or the example I used with him was I played Panama
Yes.
like 67 times or something, like just over and over and over. But it's yeah, there for a while it was surf rock music, and then that became like horror themed surf rock music, and then I diverged completely off into like just like Mexican bandstand music, where I would just listen to the same song over and over and over for like 4 or 5 hours. You know, these little 3 minute songs, just boom, over and over, and it does put you in kind of a trance to where you get, at least me, it gets me super like hyper focused on what I'm doing, so that I can kind of focus on the task and just knock it out.
Yeah, I'm the same way. And I thought I was one of the only people that did that because I bring it up with like some of my friends. They'll be like, they'll come over and I'll have my headphones on. They're like, what are you listening to? And I'll be like, oh, I'm listening to, I don't know, let's say Conquest from the Rocky soundtrack.
Sure.
And they'll be like, oh, what are you listening to that for? And be like, I don't know. I've had it on for like the last 2 hours though. And they're like, dude, one song. What's wrong with you? And they just don't get it. And it's funny that it was funny to hear you say that you did that because I'm like, I'm not alone.
Dude, sometimes it can go awry though, because I remember one of the songs I was using one time was that song by Wolf Mother. It's called Woman.
Yes.
Yeah, it's got a real like not a screechy track to it, but it's got a, you know, it's a very alive song. It's very busy, and I had that playing at low volume. And when I took my headphones off, I was like, I never want to listen to this song again. Like, actually ruined that song for me for quite a while. Like, I listen to it now, of course, but like I just did not want to hear that track ever again at a certain time. I was done.
That's too funny. The other day for me, it was actually the Great Gabagool's Pizza Party from
Nice.
Joey Royale's show.
Hey,
And I had that on
the
repeat.
best.
And my fiance was like, how can you listen to that song over and over? I'm like, because P-I, easy A. And she's like, oh my God.
Nice.
So, excuse me.
Hey, a word about Joey Royale, real quick. What a gem of a human being he is. He and Brian on that show, Pizza Party, Brian Shutter, they're awesome.
Yeah.
I love that show. It's my favorite one to listen to, like to watch, listen to. There's never a bad episode. Everybody that is on that show are just gems of human beings. So shout out to those guys.
I would agree. And yeah, that show is just fantastic. I don't know how else to say. I was telling you before we got on the air, the episode that you were on, when he was talking about learning to get your inner 12-year-old excited, I'm like, that's when I reached out to him and I was like, thank you so much for that episode. I needed to hear that.
I think everybody who was there and was was watching, it was like listening to that Rocky theme, for it was like inspiration for nerds, like we were all just like, yes, yes. I don't know about you, man, but I got off that call and I was just like, I'm stoked to go write something. I want to go make something right now. Like Joey's got me amped up.
Yeah.
I'm ready to do my inner 12-year-old, justice, give him a high five. So
Yeah. That was the same exact thing for me. I was like, I've got to go create something.
yeah,
Like now that
inspirational dudes. They're awesome.
yeah, Joey is a master of inspiration,
I
and
mean, he got me stoked.
yeah. Um, one thing I wanted to talk to you about is, are we going to get to see issue 2
Ah,
of Ray
I
Guns
have a
and Robots?
special place in my heart for that zine, Ray Guns and Robots. It's was the first sci-fi thing that I ever did, as far as like that went out to the public. Um, and it's right at my vein of sci-fi, which is like kind of an atomic retro, sort of like 50s, early 60s, sort of like, you know, um, those Svengoolie kind of like sci-fi, sort of a Dr. Demento kind of stuff. I love those old films. I love the whole aesthetic of it. When Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow came out, I think was the only person in the theater like cheering because I thought it was so cool. Um, and I got lucky on that project because I hooked up with an artist named Ed Bigford. Now, Ed and I had worked on a few things before. He'd worked on An Occurrence at Howling Crater. He had worked on Escape from Skullcano Island. He did some covers and some interior for the Flackry zines. And then when I was kind of tossed around the ideas for this, I saw that he had a portfolio of art that, was just kind of like his doodle art or stuff that he had done before and just wasn't doing anything with. So I approached him because it was all fantastic. I said, hey, man, listen, I would love to do something with these illustrations. It's very up my alley. Like, and Ed's an incredible artist. He's fantastic. But those illustrations were really the genesis. They were really the heart of that zine. So without his art in that book, and there's several others who did work for that as well, Jay Shields and Lawrence Hernandez. Lawrence Hernandez did some great pieces. But without Ed's, like, him having all those illustrations, all those cool color pieces, that book would have never got made. Like those ideas would have just sat in my notebooks or lounged around in my head and never been developed. But it was really Ed that spurred that on. And I wrote so much material for the first one that I have almost enough for a second one, that I want to call Robots Run Amok. It's basically kind of an unofficial sequel. Hey, and there's an adventure in the back of that. That was it was written by Lewis Heffer. And it's a fantastic adventure, and he showed that to me at I want to say North Texas RPG Con. I thought, oh, this would be a perfect fit for Ray Guns and Robots. You want to put it in there? And he was like, hell yeah! So he was another important part of that because it's it's a sizable portion of the zine because it's a big fat adventure in the back. So shout out to Lou because he put a lot of work into that. So, but yes, to answer your question, I'm way off topic, way off target. Yes, there will be definitely be a sequel to that.
You're good with going off target, man. I love it because
Sorry.
I've gone way off target because I was supposed to talk to you more about Dungeon Malarky, and I keep kind of pulling us off on other tangents.
It's a hang. It is what it is.
Another thing that I've kind of noticed that you do is interweave things. I guess might be the way of saying things and go back to them. You've got Big Eye Chungus, and then in Dungeon Malarky, you've got the Chungus Bazoa.
Yeah.
If I'm saying that right, I'm probably not.
Bazor.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I love how you do that with things. And obviously it's intentional, but you
Very
seem
much
to
so.
do it a lot. And it's really cool.
Yeah. So listen, I write, I don't have a game of my own. I'm not like Jeff Talanian, who has his whole Hyperborea system, and he spent 20 years, creating this really cool lore and environment for it. Like that's not where I'm at. One day, hopefully, we'll soar to those heights, but not right now. Like right now, I'm making zines and adventures for typically either Dungeons and Dragons or Dungeon Crawl Classics. A few others have followed Castles and Crusades and OSC and a few other things, but primarily for Dungeons and Dragons or for DCC. That's usually where my products fall in. So the one thing that I can do to make those very much mine is add those bits of lore, those cool little things that kind of are in the background, that if you're paying attention, like you obviously were, you'll see that, hey, this actually connects to that zine he wrote 3 years ago. And there was something in that connects to the newest one. So for instance, like I wrote Big Eye Chungus, and then in Dungeon Malarky, there's a Chungus Bazor. And there's Bazors in real life. Those are the little balls of, not congealed, but like ossified, solidified hair that you find in like veterinarians will remove out of like cattle.
Yep.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
Yeah. And so in the old world, those were considered magical objects. Those were, high alchemy. Those were the things that were, very valued by gypsies and people who traveled in those kind of occult circles. That was something that was like a big, even today, like you can find them. They'll go for a pretty good penny. They're not very common. There's plenty of them, but they're not common. It's not something you're going to find. Like in all my years of collecting oddities and weird stuff, I've only seen a handful and never seen one for sale. So they're out there, but they're expensive. So I thought, well, Big Eye Chungus, like, what happens after he eats an adventurer? He's got all these little bits of, armor and metal and belt buckles and all kinds of stuff. They pass a Bazor, and then because it comes from a Big Eye Chungus, it also has magical property. Those creatures are, they got the 10 eye stalks, the giant anti-magic beam, very reminiscent of a creature we all know and love.
Yes.
What would this object also be like? Something that is like a highly prized magical object. And I thought, of course. And here, let me write about it. Let me write some lore in there. Let me write some uses for it, and then give a cool hook that a DM or a player can smooth into the game.
Nice. So one of your adventures that I'm very excited for is, I think it's technically a redo of an occurrence at Howling Crater. I'm so excited for that to come out. And speaking of doing my homework, another thing that I found was in issue 1 of Scientific Barbarian. You had, I've got to look at my notes here, the ecology of the crater mutant. Article in there. How can that be used, do you think, to enhance an occurrence at Howling Crater where it has crater mutants in it?
Well, I mean, they're two actually fairly separate things. They're a very similar idea. I wrote both of them, but one is for Mutant Crawl Classics, which is its own thing. It's more of a gamma world than it is D&D. But there's enough of a crossover that if you have that issue 1 of Scientific Barbarian or this really sweet annual that Puppy Games put out, which is also collected in there, you can use those ideas and those, like all the little hooks and all the little bits of lore and stuff. You can use that to enhance your D&D game, or you can use the stuff from the D&D or Dungeon Crawl Classics version of an occurrence at Howling Crater to enhance your Mutant Crawl Classics game. They're interchangeable, but separate. You know what I'm saying?
Gotcha. Yep.
Like it really. So the whole idea behind Crater Mutants, the whole gestation, it comes from like films like Wrong Turn or The Hills Have Eyes or any of those like evil hillbilly. I think they're called Hicksploitation.
Yes.
Films. Like Spider Baby and what is it? not They Crave Blood, but it's like one of those grindhouse films, where it's all about like deliverance. Like
Yeah.
there are these people who are living in this very far out of the way place, and when you go poking your nose around in places you shouldn't be, there are consequences. That's the sort of like idea behind the Crater Mutants, except that these guys, these horrible mutated hillbillies, basically, they're off in this desolate crater, and they're worshiping pieces of this. Instead of worshiping, whatever gods of the campaign there might be, they found this, this like wrecked atomic core, and they're taking this thing and it's mutating all of them, but they're taking this thing and they're worshiping it as a god. And the story just goes on from there. Like it gets crazier and crazier. They're using it to mutate other people that they bring in to grow their family. It's a really crazy sort of like scenario, but they make great villains because they're kind of irredeemable. Who hasn't watched the scenes from The Hills Have Eyes or Deliverance or Wrong Turn and thought like, there's if you're one of those guys, there's no going back. Like the paladin doesn't feel bad about cutting them down. The cleric knows there's no saving them. So you can kind of like waste them at with little with not feeling too bad. Plus, they're cannibals. They're gonna eat you. And what fate really is worse for any adventurer than being eaten? So
it doesn't sound fun. Getting eaten.
There's a very primal thing about that, about like a very it's like scary thing about cannibalism and just in general. Like I don't want to get too into that. It's pretty gruesome, but like that's a very primal fear. That goes all the way back. That's way deep in our genes. It's so repellent to just about everyone on the planet that we all, no matter what beliefs we have, we all kind of universally agree that is terrible and horrible in the extreme, and we won't abide by it. So they make great villains, and that's why Crater Mutants are in Scientific Barbarian. That's why they're in Occurrence at Howling Crater for Dungeons and Dragons and for DCC. So good stuff.
They are. I love the Crater Mutants. So I shouldn't say I love the Crater Mutants. That sounds messed up, but I love the concept of it.
Well, I think it helps too to not just kind of like do it like a blanket thing. You go, all right, well, here is yada yada yada. Like in the Occurrence of Howling Crater, especially, like we kind of really go in. Like there's a whole family that's described. It's like what are their customs? Like what are their places that they live at? Like what does their city look like? What are the trappings of society? So that they're not just kind of like these kind of cardboard cutout monsters. They might as well be gnolls or bugbears or hobgoblins if I'm going to do that. But if you add in all this lore and all these kind of cool details, they take on an extra dimension of horribleness.
They do.
that really kind of resonates with the players because they're these repellent sort of enemies. So,
gotcha. One of your favorite creatures that I have come across that you've designed was the thunder chicken. I love that thing. I love the thunder squawk. Where did that come from? Like,
in all honesty, it comes from kind of a cross meeting of two places. The artist who drew that is an artist named Jay Shields. James E. Shields, but I think he just goes by Jay. Sure, I call him that. Maybe I've been doing it wrong this entire time, but James Shields. He created the illustration for that before I had the idea. And I remember I was looking at it one day and I thought, I've always wanted to put an axe beak. Remember axe beaks?
Yep.
From the first edition Monster Manual. I always wanted to put one of those things in an adventure. Like I just thought they were cool. And I was kind of riffing on the idea, and I just thought, well, it doesn't have to be an axe beak. It could be this thing. It could be this cool looking, giant bird, basically. And then you could have them in like packs. And then, I was like, well, what if they squawked and it had some sort of effect? And then off that I riffed. I was like, well, cool. Maybe like there's like this thunderous effect. Anyways, it just, went from one thing, jumped to another and to another in a span of like 45 seconds. And I was like, thunder chickens. And I thought people would be like, all right, that's kind of silly, that's kind of gonzo. But no, when I run those at cons, like if they encounter with those, it's always like people always appreciate it. It's always kind of cool. So and I really am impressed that you that you knew about that one. That you did your homework.
I try to. I try to for sure when I'm going to interview someone because I love being able to kind of, I don't know, maybe I guess you say surprise people with questions that get them like, wow, where did you
Man, thunder
hear that?
chickens. I didn't think we were going to be talking about thunder chickens
Thunder
tonight.
chickens are awesome. And it's funny. Another thing that you do that I really, really, really love is the ads on
Oh,
the backs and within your zines. So they take me back to the old commercials that were on the back of comic books when we were kids, where you
oh
could
yeah.
order the snapping gum or the hand buzzer or the sea monkeys or
Yeah.
whatever. And how did you start doing that?
Well, I love those things too. Like I love comic books. I love old monster magazines, especially um, old issues of Starlog or Fangoria, Famous Monsters of Filmland, things like that. And again, comics were a huge part of my adolescence. Um, and for me, it wasn't like Spider-Man and the X-Men. It was more like Weird War Tales and GI Combat and like House of Mystery. And then later, it was the X-Men and Fantastic Four and Spider-Man. So seeing those old ads, in the back of those, I was ordering from those. Like Johnson and Smith was an old, I think it's called Johnson, maybe Smith and Johnson, I don't know. Was an old company that you could order the masks, you could order the snapping gum, the fake vomit, the dog poo, the glasses that have the eyes that come out. You could order all that stuff. And my granddad and I would mow the lawn, I would save up my money, and he would make an order, and it would come in, 6 weeks later, and that was awesome for a couple of days. Was trying to prank everybody with a fake spider, or trying to save it for that Darth Vader mask. So I had an idea for a few of these, and I approached again Ed Bickford. He's the guy who drew all four of them that we used. He illustrated all of them, and he just knocked it out of the park, like stratosphere level stuff. If you look at any of those four like fake ads, they're all awesome. There's not one that's weaker than the others. They're all great, and they serve. Okay, so from a publishing standpoint, from like a layout sort of like graphic design standpoint, sometimes you lay things out and you need another page, or you lay things out and you've got one page extra, so you have to go in and take something out, or you have to add 3 more pages. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Because everything needs to be in
Two-page
fours.
spread, right?
Yeah, 2 pages aside, 2 pages, everything needs to be like that. So I figure, well, let's make 4 of these fake ads, full page ads, that anytime that we're short a page or 2 pages or 3 pages, we can just use these ads. And if we come off with all the right amount of pages, we'll add all 4. You know what I mean? So from that standpoint, they help fill out page count and are something cool to look at, because there's nothing worse I hate than a blank page in a module or a zine. Like you get to the back of the zine, there's like 3 blank pages. Like, why?
Yeah.
You could have put something cool on there, or just taking something out. Like, don't give me 3 extra pages. You're doing yourself a disservice, because now you got to pay for extra pages. So I thought, well, this is a cool way to fill out those pages, but it's also just something I want to see. So we just riffed on those old ads, like the Sea Monkey ad, and the ad for all the weird little things that you can buy from the catalog. There's one for the what is it, the where the bully kicks the sand in the guy's face, and he goes and gets Charles Atlas. And,
Yes.
he's lifting weights, and he comes back and he punches the bully, and he's got the girl. There's one for that, but it's a barbarian. He just cuts the guy's head off. But there's a bunch of different ones, and we just kind of use them interchangeably. And that's one of my favorite things about when I get a final version of a book, is going through and being like, we use those ads again. It just looks so cool.
I think my favorite one of those is the magician's wig, and he's bald.
Yeah.
And it's like,
on purpose.
yeah. There's someone in the chat, I can't quite make out their name. It's like John, JNLSN family, says Chungus Bezos.
Oh, yeah.
Another thing we had talked about before we came on the air, that you kind of touched on already, was having grown up in Arkansas and there not being much D&D around. And
Right.
for me, I knew I mentioned to you that I grew up in a home where I went and I bought Twisted Sister Stay Hungry. My mom heard that tape come on and came marching up the stairs, and was just like, this is not going to be in our house. You're going to let the devil in. And what were your experiences with, I guess, the Satanic Panic, really, where we kind of touched on that?
Yeah, so obviously, satanic panic was very real, especially in the southern states. My story is a little different than most because mine has kind of a happy ending to it. Um, and my parents were never the problem. They were always very supportive of me playing role playing games. As long as I kept my grades up, I could play as much role playing games as I want. My mom was like a card carrying member of the science fiction book club, and they just she understood that this game about dragons and wizards and stuff was not going to lead me to the devil. Um, they were worried, they were worried about other more like realistic threats to their teenage son rather than just a bunch of kids that wanted to it's like stay home on a Friday night and play D&D. But my story is that I was about 15 or 16 maybe, and a little tiny shop opened up in our hometown called Crystal Dreams Books and Things. It was kind of run by this ex-hippie lady, was super cool, super laid back, kind of a motherly figure. Always wore these long skirts with a sequence and had long braids and big thick glasses. She's a bookworm, very cool lady. But she had books about crystals and dream catchers and all that kind of stuff in their shop. But she had a really small area where she had Dungeons and Dragons books, and it was during kind of the era of second edition. Like second edition had just come out,
Yep.
and she had, which I saw for the first time, dice. Because remember when we were talking, I was telling you, I was like, I didn't really have dice at the first, when I first started playing D&D, they were left out of the red box that I got just by accident, I'm sure. But she had this little thing of like a little pile of D&D books because her son, when they moved there from California, and her son had played D&D, so she knew that it was cool. She knew that it was fun. So my friends and I, who were just starving for anything related at all to fantasy or D&D, were just like, we converged on the shop, and we started ordering things out of the catalog. We're like, okay, we want, she started like, these guys ordered like $500 stuff this week. Like, this could actually be like a business. So she started getting like Dragon Magazine, and she would get like copies of the Player's Handbook. We could just order whatever we wanted from the TSR, like the TSR catalog at the time. She would order it for us. Like, boom, it would be there in a couple weeks. So we were just getting everything all at once. Like, we had never really played modules. We didn't know anything about anything really. We had the Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master's Guide, and that monstrous compendium. And then of course my friend's dad had all the older books like the Arduin Grimoire and all the deities and Demi, all that stuff. But like for new stuff, it was just like all coming in at once. So that's the setup, right? So we're just buying the stuff left and right. So one Sunday morning, I met with my friends. We're at church, which is like kind of like right around the corner from this place, a couple blocks, whatever. So we go to church, and church lets out at whatever, 11:30, 12 o'clock, and they're like, hey, we're having a potluck at 1 o'clock, come back. So we're like, cool, let's go over to Crystal Dreams Books and Things. We'll look at the D&D stuff. Maybe we'll walk down the park or whatever. And while I was in there, I bought my first set of like little ChessX hazy gray dice. It was my very first I ever owned myself, like my own dice. I put them in my pocket. So like 15 minutes before we're getting ready to go back to church for this potluck, we're standing outside the church, and I'm showing this other kid who didn't come with us my cool new dice because he played D&D with us. And a church elder walked by and saw the dice and just like gave it to me. Just was like reaming me out. It was like, this is the work of the devil and yada yada. I mean, just really, I mean, he's a 50-year-old man. I'm like this 15, 16-year-old kid. And I'm like, just kind of taking it, whatever, yada yada. So I put them back in my pocket. Didn't really think much about it. Didn't tell my parents when I got home. I was just like, all right, well, this is an old man. He doesn't understand my cool. He doesn't understand metal. He doesn't understand D&D, how cool it is, whatever. I kind of forgot about it. Well, I didn't go back to church that next week for whatever reason. I don't even remember, but it wasn't intentional. Some of my friends were like, man, they were wondering where you were at. Like they were like, do we run him off? Like, and then we told them the story about how the elder had approached you and yelled at you. And they were like, they really want you to come back. And at that point I was like, I'm never going back. Yeah. I'm not, and my parents didn't go to this church. It was just something I was going to with my friends,
Yeah.
So the next week comes, I don't go back to church, and then there's a knock on my door, and it's the pastor and like 3 other elders, and they're standing at the bottom of our stairs. And my father comes out. He's like, "Who are these men? I'll handle this." My father comes out. He's like 6'4" giant. Comes out. He's like, "Can I help you, gentlemen?" And they're like, "We're here to see Levi." He's like, "What is this about?" Kind of deal. It's a small town. Everybody knows each other, sort of deal. And the pastor and these 3 other elders, one of which was like the youth minister, or the guy who was in charge of like all the teenagers and whatnot. And they apologized to me, basically. Like, these grown men were able to put aside their prejudices about this game, and they apologized to me like I was basically a grown man. They're like, "Hey, we're really sorry. Like, he doesn't speak for the rest of us. Like, we know that this game, it has its challenges in the media, whatever. Like, there's some people who don't like it or don't agree with it. But we know you're a good kid. And like, we know that you're not trying to summon the devil or anything." And my dad's just kind of standing over, nodding his head, And they're like, "Hey, we really want you to come back." And they gave me they were like, "Here, we have a Bible. It has my name was monogrammed on the corner of the Bible. They're like, we want this we want to give this to you. We're trying to say we're sorry. Please come back. Like, we're very embarrassed that this guy said this to you." And I thought, man, that was really cool. Like, this could have gone a completely different way.
Yeah.
It completely alienated me towards mainstream religion and it is what it is. But I just thought that was a great ending. Like, that was really cool of them to do that. And I ended up going back to the church and I wasn't like a super ultra religious kid, but I made a lot of friends, at that church, and still in contact with some of them to this day. So that particular Satanic Panic story had a good ending. Didn't start out great. Me getting yelled at by this this 50-year-old man about my chess X dice that I had in my pocket, but it ended good, which is good.
That's pretty odd. That is awesome that they did that. Like, that's shows a lot of humility on their behalf.
I thought so too.
Like,
Even then, even at that like teenage age, I was like, this is unusual. Like, I was not expecting this. I thought this was going to be a deal where people were going to tell on me for something that I did, or or whatever, or make something up. But then for them to just be cool like that, I thought, man, it was like a lesson. That's a good lesson you get just as a kid, where it shows that, hey, adults mess up too, and when we do, it's important for us to apologize. So that was just a good lesson and a good experience. So, like I said, it started out bad, ended well.
I'm glad you had that experience because, mine was completely different. Because my uncle was a pastor and didn't like it. And that's where my mom picked up a lot of her beliefs, was from them, of like, yeah, when we go off the air, I'll tell you some of the stuff that went on. My mom, bless her heart and rest her soul, was an amazing mom, but one of her many faults was falling into that trap back then.
Sure.
Because I had to hide everything D&D that I had, and it's like, if I wanted to listen to Twisted Sister, Iron Maiden, or whatever, it was always at a friend's house.
Yeah.
And
I knew a lot of kids like that.
Yeah, and it was a stinker, but it is what it is.
Listen, my parents were just the opposite. Again, it was really all about keeping your grades up, and I wasn't a smoker. I didn't do drugs. I didn't even really drink very much. It was just, they were really concerned about like me just kind of staying on the straight and narrow, graduating school and not becoming a terrible person. That was really what their like concerns were. Like, I would go down to the video rental store, like the VHS store in our town, Mina Video or Rick's Prime Time, one of those little boutique, small little neighborhood shops. And right inside the door, I remember of the one, there was a big box that had all the posters that they would buy a copy of Return of the Living Dead on VHS, and then they would have the poster to put inside the store. But because they were buying so many books, or so many videos, all the posters they didn't have room to put them all up. So they would just put them in this big box, and you could get them for like $0.25. So I'd go down there with like $5 worth of lawn mowing money or whatever, and I would come home with like 8 posters. I had it all, man. I had Lost Boys was on the front door to my room. I had Return of the Living Dead next to like Monkey Shines, next to like, I mean, you name it. If it was between like 84 and 87, it was on my wall. If it was cool, like Near Dark, I had like the poster, all this
Nice.
sci-fi stuff, Night of the Creeps. I had all that stuff up on the wall, So my parents would walk in my room, they'd just see all these horror posters, and comic books and like monster magazines and like Garbage Pail Kids, and that's the sort of thing that they were cool. They were cool with me having all that stuff because, again, as long as I kept my grades up, or like as long as I wasn't like didn't have a baggie of weed in my sock drawer, they were cool with it. Like, hey, he's into what he's into. It's not hurting him. Let him do his thing.
Well, I'm glad you had that experience. Yeah, you're much luckier than I am in that
Yes.
regard. So one thing that we've kind of talked about a little bit about that I'd like to touch back on, and then I'll let you get back to your evening,
Sure.
is you talked about Chase being your mentor.
Casey.
Casey, sorry. My apologies, Casey. What would you say to anyone out there looking for someone to be their mentor?
Huh.
Or looking for a mentor? I shouldn't say
Okay,
for anyone
so
specific.
there's a few if you're trying to get your foot into the hobby, there's a few things I think that you can do that will improve your chances. One is, first and foremost, go to cons. If you can find a con that is somewhere near to you, go to cons and just meet people. It doesn't mean you have to have these long conversations with them, or you have to buy all the books at their table, or you have to play in every single game. But go to the cons and just ask people. If you have a question about the hobby, or about publishing, or about their book or whatever, just ask them, and you'll find that 99 times out of 100, they're very happy to talk to you. And almost everyone that I've ran across in this hobby in the last 5 years or so, they're all great. They're all very, very nice. Sometimes they're busy, doing something else, or they've got something on their mind. They're preoccupied. They might not have a lot of time to talk to you, or you might think that they're blowing you off or whatever. But that's almost always not the case. It's just something else is going on. So get out there, go to cons, play games, meet creators, meet fellow writers or artists, and just create a dialogue. Just talk. Just meet people, and again, you'll find really that everybody's pretty approachable, and nobody's a dick. Like, there's not many people out there that are going to give you the cold shoulder. It's pretty nice. Like, we're talking about Total Con. That's one of those cons where you can go up and talk to somebody like Alan Hammock, who goes all the way back to the early TSR days.
Yep.
And he is just the nicest man. He will have a pint of Guinness with you and tell you all you want to know about, slave lords, or, the Ghost Tower of Inverness, or whatever, he'll get into it, and is happy to do so. Like, he's just a really nice guy. And a lot of other creators like that. Jim Wampler's like that. Tim Kask is very approachable. He might be kind of a grumpy curmudgeon or whatever, but his heart, he's just a guy who loves his grandkids. He worked for TSR for a long time. He's got a lot of knowledge rattling around in that brain of his. Runs some really cool stuff. So all these people are very approachable, and especially like the up and coming kind of crop. I say up and coming, but just kind of like the latest era of indie creators and third party publishers. There's kind of a movement across most of us of gratitude, that we have to give back to our fellows and other creators and other people what we took when we first got our foot in the door. So you'll find that most of those people, like Joey, like Brian Shutter, like myself, like Casey, Skeeter Green, Ian McGarty, Jason Gardner, Jeff, all these folks, they're all extremely approachable, and they're really, really nice people, and they'll answer your questions. They'll take time out of their day to kind of like, oh, hey, this might seem like a given to somebody else, but you don't know. So let me kind of walk you through the process, and they'll answer questions and help you kind of find your way. I mean, Skeeter Green and Zach Glazer, they run a seminar at most of the cons they go to about small publishers, about indie publishers. They'll tell you how to break into the business. They'll tell you how to get your foot into the hobby and meet people. So those resources are out there if you go to cons. They're there. The other piece of advice, again, is kind of a social portion of that, is if you have a community online that you're part of, like Dungeon Crawl Classics, Mutant Crawl Classics, they have very active and extremely welcoming online communities, and just get in with those guys, and if you are interested in the same thing that they're interested in, share that with them. If you're creating something, just ask all the right questions. You can get out. They're very welcoming communities, and it's not just for those. I mean, they got it for Swords and Wizardry, they have it for Castles and Crusades, and just about everything else. Neon Lords of the Toxic Wasteland has a fantastic online community. And probably one of the funnest, to be honest. Like they're posting the best posts across the board, period. But just get involved in those online communities. Final piece would be that if you have an idea in your head and that you have something that you want to get out into the world, just do it. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just first and foremost, write it. Sit it down. Even if you only have an outline for what you want to do, sit down with a piece of paper and write out that outline. Boom. You are already 50% of the way there because you wrote it out. You got it out of your head and on the paper where you can see it. And then you can take as long as you want to tinker with that, move it around. It never has to be perfect. Okay. You can show it to your friends. You can show it to other creators and ask them what their opinions are of it. And don't be dismayed. Just keep chipping away at it. Keep chipping away until you have it where you want it to be. Jungle Tomb of the Mummy Bride was 8 pages. It was going to be just a quick little flimsy module when I first started. Ended up being 64 because I got some really good advice. I got some great art. That's actually the second version, but the original version was only 64. I think that one's like 100 and something. But
yeah, this one is 144 pages.
Yeah. So, it goes from being very small sometimes to very big. But the most important step is just doing it. It's just getting out and doing it. It's like going to the gym. The most important step to going to the gym is getting out of your house, getting in your car, and driving to the gym. Because once you're there, you'll go. Same thing would be getting out your laptop, taking a minute to sit in front of it and go, okay, I want to write something. Even if you only get half a page, who cares? You've got something out that day. And if you don't feel like doing it the next day, then don't. Come back a week later and start doing it again. But when you have that time, get it out of your brain and get it down onto something physical. So those are my 3 pieces of advice.
That's some very sound advice. I do want to give a quick shout out to my homeboys, Anthony in the chat, and my boy Tesley. Tesley actually designed my logo. So if you get a chance, check out Tesley art. But yeah, that was all I had tonight, man. So thank you so much for joining me.
That was a good hang, man.
Thanks. And folks, if you have not gotten over to back Dungeon Malarky yet, go ahead and do it. Don't just hover over that back this project button. Click it, get some more pages in this book, and you're not going to regret it. I can already tell you that from the volume of work I have of Levi's. He does some fantastic work.
That's very kind of you to say.
Oh, I totally mean it. So, but thanks for joining us tonight, folks, and for everybody that was active in the chat. I really appreciate it. I do have a link to the Kickstarter in the description for anyone interested. And if you enjoyed this interview, give it a thumbs up and maybe think about subscribing to the channel. Other than that, have a great night, folks, and happy gaming.